You to this story now. Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa says he's humbled by his re-election, but main opposition leader Nelson Chamisa is rejecting the results, calling it a gigantic fraud. SADC is also not endorsing the elections, saying they did not adhere to the ideals of free and fair elections. We're now joined by Zimbabwean journalist and writer Hopewell Chin'ono. Thank you very much, Mr. Chin'ono, for your time here on ENCA. Of course, you're one of the journalists that has been able to show both the critical and fair side of the Zimbabwean government. SADC has not endorsed what's happened in Zimbabwe in terms of the 23rd August elections. What did you see? What did you think?
Well, the election process was flawed, as SADC said. And when an election process is flawed, it means that the result becomes illegitimate. But the problem that we are facing now is that the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, is demanding a result from that flawed process. We saw ballot boxes ballot papers not being brought to the polling stations for over 12 hours. In rural areas, we had people who were working for the ruling party in conjunction with the Secret Service called FAZ, F-A-Z, demanding that rural folk show them their ID cards and they take the ID numbers and their names down. It was a form of intimidation, an intimidation that has happened before. So these folks were being told that if you vote for the opposition, we will know because we have taken down the details. That is why the election was deemed flawed by SADC. Yeah. But the fact that the opposition leader is now demanding a result from that flawed process, it complicates the issue.
And Hopewell, tell me about what the opposition is saying. The opposition CCC is suggesting that the late, deliverance of ballot papers was strategic, in that, Zanu PF and the Electoral Commission on purpose didn't deliver on time or at all ballot papers to areas that are strategically CCC, communities that support CCC. Is this true?
It is correct. As I said earlier, ballot papers were not delivered on time in strongholds of the opposition, mainly in urban areas. So the ballot papers were, for instance, printed in Harare, but there are places in Harare that didn't have ballot papers for over 12 hours. And yet strongholds of the ruling party, Zanu PF, which are 300-400 kilometers away, had ballot papers. So it was a strategic move to try and dissuade the strongholds of the opposition from voting, frustrate the voters so that they end up leaving. There were mothers who had their kids who stayed there for hours on end and ended up leaving because they could not stay into the night waiting for the ballot papers to be delivered. In an area where I grew up myself, a township called Glenora, ballot papers were delivered around 10 p.m. in the evening, almost 15 hours after the election should have started.
Now, did you see the response by the ruling Zanu PF to SADC and its observers is saying or suggesting that the observers chair or the leader of the SADC observers, that is, of course, the former deputy president of Zambia, is biased? Why would Zanu PF suggest that Mumba is being biased against them and is more for Chamisa?
Well, Zanu PF is expected to say that because Zanu PF is the main culprit in all these things that happened. Nevas Mumba, the former vice president of Zambia, is not coming to Zimbabwe or did not come to Zimbabwe as a Zambian or as a politician from Zambia. He came as the head of SADC. His presentation was not for himself. It was for the SADC observer team. It's a team of people. He's just a spokesperson. So Zanu PF is saying these things, the same way they call journalists who expose their corruption puppets of the West. The opposition is called American puppets. So that is expected from Zanu PF. But the fact of the matter is that Zanu PF is not disputing the facts from those reports. It is just trying to take the messenger who's delivering the message.
But at the end of the day, the race, the conclusion of the race was quite, close. I mean, 2,300 against 1,900 is a very small margin. So it's kind of showing where or to which trajectory the electorate of Zimbabwe is going.
Well, once a well has been poisoned, anyone who tries to drink water from there is drinking poisoned water. So the result, because it's disputed and because it's coming from a flawed process, because everything that happened in regards to irregularities was happening in front of international cameras, it's difficult to say what the result actually is. That's why some people are worried that the opposition leader still is demanding a result from such a flawed process. Many would have thought that he would have pushed for an annulment and another election run properly under the right conditions. This was not just about the election day. The pre-election period was also terrible. The opposition was not allowed to hold at least over 100 rallies.
Yeah.
And yet President Mnangagwa and Zanu PF were able to campaign freely without anyone hindering them. So the whole process was flawed, and it's difficult to see how a process that was flawed can give a legitimate result.
Quite disappointing then for the people of Zimbabwe not to see any change from ballot papers to flawed campaign periods all the way to elections. And then, of course, the avoidance of what happened in 2018, 9 days after election. That time there was violence. Quite disappointing, I imagine, for the people of Zim.
It is very disappointing. What is more disappointing is now that the African National Congress, which is the ruling party in South Africa, its Secretary General Fikile Mbalula spent the better part of yesterday and the day before yesterday tweeting messages of solidarity with Zanu PF, knowing very well that this election crisis in Zimbabwe is going to end up with millions of Zimbabweans coming to South Africa, both legally and illegally, because the economy in Zimbabwe is dead. 95% of our potential workforce is out of work. Hospitals don't work in Zimbabwe. The biggest hospital only has one maternity theater. That's why 75% of women giving birth at South Africa's Musina Hospital are Zimbabwean, because 2,500 Zimbabwean women die every year giving birth. So we hope that there will be responsible leadership in SADC, and we hope that the South African ruling party will restrain its Secretary General from tweeting irresponsible messages supporting a flawed process that will end up with an immigration crisis on the doorsteps of Pretoria.
All right, Hopewell, thank you very much for your time and for speaking to us here on ENCA. Hopewell Chin'ono is a journalist and a writer from Zim. Let's